Intentionally so. It could be intentionally so, but it's definitely serving as that.
I think it is getting us acclimated to a surveillance world.
That sounds a bit 1984 and creepy.
People are getting really used to sharing all kinds of information, putting everything about their entire life online.
We're putting a lot of information in a public sphere, and that information is accessible to anyone.
I think it's definitely acclimating people.
Who knows if that could be used for good to hold us to a higher standard, or for something else. It's really about what we do with it.
I personally love Facebook, and it's just a way for me to keep in contact with my friends who live all over the world. And for anyone to use that for, like, keeping track of people, I think that's just really creepy, actually. I don't feel comfortable with that.
It's incredible. Internet kill switches, cybersecurity, the takeover of the web, warrantless wiretapping. This is America 10 years after 9/11, and it has nothing to do with keeping us safe. Zuckerman, the owner of Facebook, insultingly called his own users dumb Fs. But worst of all, once you've posted your photos and your personal data on Facebook, they say they own it forever. You can make your account private, but it's always there. They're using it. Social networks like Twitter, Facebook, and all of it, they have deep government ties. Google was set up with funding from In-Q-Tel, a company whose main client is the CIA. As Wayne Madsen reports, the CIA has always used the popular media of the day to push their propaganda. And today we see Facebook expanding their face recognition capabilities. I'm Darren McBreen for InfoWars Nightly News. Alex, back to you.
We now take you live
to the Central Texas Command Center
in the heart of the resistance. You're listening to The Alex Jones Show.
Well, it's 4 o'clock, 4:01 now, Central Standard Time, 5 o'clock Eastern. And George Noory, one of the hardest working guys in the media, and, of course, one of the most listened to and watched, is our guest. He's a multi-time Emmy Award winner for his news TV coverage. He's a longtime radio talk show host. He's a best-selling author, and he has the second largest radio show in audience, period. 16+ million people. That's just on AM and FM, and there's XM, internet. It's just amazing. And he really, more than anybody out there, if you had to put it all together, helped bring my message of information to the general public in the last 8 years, having me on as a guest at Coast to Coast AM, coasttocoastam.com. And by the way, he invited me on this next Monday. It was funny. I mean, I invited him to pop on here. You kind of begged him because I know he's a busy guy and needs to get some sleep. And then I kind of said, hey, I like to do the full interviews. I like popping in during the news. He said, all right, Alex, you're on next Monday. But then they told me what they wanted to talk about. It's always, just simple areas. I can talk about whatever I want, but it's general topics. He said, I want to talk about Alex Jones and then the state of the world. So I guess we'll be talking some about little old me, but I guess it is kind of the transformation and awakening. But I got to tell you, George, so much of what you've been talking about for decades and I've been talking about for close to that, it's not that it's even becoming passé, but now it's like it's worse than we thought. Government wants Google to shut down videos that are critical. Street lights that listen to you. Oh, there are cancer viruses in the vaccine. I mean, it's like if we're almost becoming passé at a certain point or mainstream, then how much worse is it that we don't know, George?
Alex, it's George Orwell. It's 1984, except he was off by 20 years.
Yeah.
And, here we are right in the middle of this. When you hear stories that Homeland Security wants to monitor the social networks just to see if there's any potential of civil unrest, these are scary times that we're in right now. Technology is one of the main reasons these things have happened to us. What you've been able to do and what we've done on Coast to Coast, and by the way, we're popping champagne because we've now hit 559 commercial radio station affiliates, which is just about unheard of. And you are right, we are number 2 in the world in terms of affiliate count, and we're slowly creeping up, and one day we'll be number 1. But what's happening, I think the public has become aware, not only because of technology and social networks, that move information faster and faster and faster. But they are also smart enough to realize that, you know what, we love our country, but you can't accept everything that government hands to us. You've got to question it. And if people had done this back in World War II, example, Pearl Harbor, Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin, and all these other different areas, they might have been able to stand up and say, look, enough is enough. What is going on here? And we find ourselves right now in the middle of all this with this vast amount of information out there at our disposal, and people are becoming more aware of it. And that's what you're feeling, that's what I'm feeling, and that's what so many other people are feeling.
Well, George, in fact, that was my next question for you. You see the awakening. You are a world-renowned analyst, media personality, researcher, probably one of the best interviewers out there, bar none, probably even better than Larry King in his heyday. You have your finger on the pulse, so I know you're picking up what I'm picking up. I am a person who is well-known, especially because of the Internet, and so anywhere I go, people stop me, and it's not every 10 or 15 people now, it's every 3 or 4 or 5, no matter where I go. But they're always saying, nobody's waking up. We're in deep trouble. Oh, my God, it's all true. I really appreciate you. And so they don't understand that actually we are becoming the majority and more people are awake than they know because they're not George Noory, they're not Alex Jones. There's only a handful of media personalities in the real media, in the reality, truth-based, seeking media who are recognized. And so we get the feedback and see the awakening, but then people individually out there, they're awake, but they feel like they're alone. I think that's why Coast to Coast is so important, because people can actually hear, and you have polls, and people know then that they're not in the minority. They're not crazy. They're not kooks. Can you speak to that phenomenon from your incredible reach, communicating and doing conferences all over the country?
Well, first of all, I learned at a very early age, and I'm talking 19 years old when I first started working in broadcasting. I think I was on the other end of Marconi when he said, "Can anyone hear me?" I think it was me who said, "Yeah, I can, Mr. Marconi." But I learned, Alex, at a very young age that the success of a broadcaster was very simple. There was a simple formula here, and that was get rid of your ego. It's not about you. It's about the story, and it's about your listener, or it's about your viewer. And one of the simple techniques that I do on a very regular basis, because people say to me, "My God, you're so in touch with stuff," or "You're so ahead of things. How do you do it?" It's a simple formula. I go out regularly in the public, whether, as you just said, it's a speaking engagement, or whether it's a restaurant, or a shopping center, or you name it. I go out there and I talk to people. I listen to what they have to say. And so if 3 years ago somebody says, "You know what, my company's going to lay me off. They're having trouble making sales. This has never happened before." And then you hear it from another person and another person and another person. Well, then you begin to realize there's a pattern here, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. And so we were miles ahead of the mainstream media when we started talking about the economic mess or the mortgage mess. People were saying to me, "I'm having trouble making my mortgage payments. I just can't do it anymore." Way before anybody even knew about the derivative problems and things like that.
Oh, I heard you 8 years ago talking about, you weren't calling it robo-signing. You had a guest on. That's actually, because I learned a lot from you, not vice versa, but I mean, years ago, you had guests on about the mortgage fraud and taking houses they didn't have the paper on, and that's only come out in the last year or two.
Yeah, exactly, and nobody believed us. Nobody believed us. I mean, just recently, the mainstream media now is beginning to pick up the things that you and I do, and they're beginning to realize that, you know what, this might be a major story. There's something going on here. When we talked about, look, the SARS virus is not going to be a pandemic. The H1N1 virus is not going to wipe out society. It's a push to sell vaccines. Folks, back off. And they had like 200 cases worldwide, and I'm going, this is ludicrous. We get 36,000 100,000 deaths a year just in the United States from the so-called seasonal flu, and that's what they think we have. And I'm saying, if there's any pandemic, it's the seasonal regular flu. It's not all this other bunk that they're throwing at us. And so what we've done on Coast to Coast, whether the stories are paranormal, like my book that just came out, Talking to the Dead, or UFOs or Bigfoot, we're also into alternative medicine, we're into cutting-edge science, and we're into mainstream news stories with what I call the coast-to-coast twist. Last night, I had Jerry Corsi on for an hour talking about the rumblings that Israel is looking for some internal support to go after Iran, and that's another issue. I'm not going to talk about the justification of Iran. I think they harbor terrorism, and something needs to be done. And most Iranians, by the way, who live in that country, want a pro-Western type of life. They love America, and a lot of people don't understand that. But it's these mullahs who are taking over that are doing all these horrendous things. But we are picking up stories like that, and I had Corsi on last night talking about how we are on the verge of a military intervention against Iran. And then we talked about the ramifications of that. You know, Israel has nukes, we have nukes, Iran has missiles, not nukes yet, but maybe they do. Who knows? Those stories will start popping up, Alex, I guarantee you, within the next week or two on the mainstream media. Matt Drudge, whom I think the world of, is also on the cutting edge of all this. He's in our club. He's the one who's also up there sticking his neck in the noose, getting these stories out to the public. And, you know, I just think that people like you and Drudge and the things that we do on Coast to Coast are so critical to allow people who are listening to make a decision, to stand up, to put their foot down and say, you know what, I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Well, I agree with you, George, and there really is a club. I would say George Noory, Matt Drudge, Alex Jones. I mean, who else is there on a huge scale? I guess some of the other coast-to-coast hosts, Ian Punnett and others. Who else is out there actually even raising real issues? You know, people sometimes call me and they say, well, you know, they get into some wild stuff on Coast to Coast AM, but I can't quit listening to it. And I'm like, regardless, it's healthy to talk and explore everything. And 10 years ago, I didn't have this view. Now, as I've learned a little, because it gets you to think about other things and have an open mind. It's the closed minds that are the big problem that we face as a society. And then I realize things I talk about, even though I know they're documented and true, other people just aren't ready to be able to face it and deal with it. And so I want to bring you I want to get into the whole New World Order and the Vatican calling for world government and global regulations, you know, global currency, which means global tax. So don't let me forget to get to that with you, George. But let's get into UFOs now, because no one can deny that back when Art Bell was pioneering really deep discussion of this type of stuff, and we're on a planet, we know there's all sorts of weird stuff going on. It's in the Bible. It's in the Sumerian text. They got helicopters carved on the side of the pyramids, you know, down the tombs. We know there's a lot of stuff we don't know that's, you know, going on. I mean, we know we have knowledge of a very limited spectrum. But now with government coming out more and more, now with, speaking of the Vatican, saying get ready for something and, you know, contact, from you're in the middle of it like nobody else, you're focusing on this every day, do you think they're getting ready to disclose something or to stage something to try to unify the planet, as some government documents and world leaders have talked about? I mean, if you had to crystallize it, what's going on with the off-world or on-world life forms?
A couple of years ago, I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. that Steve Bassett had put on. It's Exopolitics on UFOs, and Steve has been a guest when I was doing my little local St. Louis show back in 1997. He's been a regular guest on Coast to Coast. He believes that government will eventually disclose. Well, he